Former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte takes over as NATO Secretary-General this week. He's tasked with holding the Western military alliance together with the war in Ukraine at a critical point and a pivotal US election approaching. Deutsche Welle correspondent Thomas Sparrow joins us now from Berlin. Thomas, g'day. So how big of a change will Mark Rutte's leadership mean to NATO?
It is indeed a change, and Mark Rutte will want to leave his mark, will want to make sure that his priorities are also fulfilled. Mark Rutte is described as a direct, no-nonsense politician with plenty of experience at the European level, having led several coalitions in his home country, the Netherlands. At the same time, however, experts do believe that there will be a large degree of continuity between Mark Rutte's leadership and the previous leadership in NATO, and that has to do with some of the challenges that the alliance is facing, not only the war in Ukraine, but also internally among the different countries. There are differences when it comes to defense priorities. And the situation overall in the world when it comes to defense and security is not necessarily getting better. So you have several crises, from Ukraine to what we're seeing now in the Middle East, which will certainly require NATO, and in particular Mark Rutte, to have a large degree of continuity with the previous NATO administration.
And how will Mark Rutte and NATO more broadly deal with the latest challenges in the war in Ukraine?
One element which is particularly important for NATO is that NATO members continue to step up their budget, their defense budgets. There is a target of 2% of GDP that NATO members have committed to, and in fact in recent years several members, including Germany, have stepped up and increased their military expenditure. However, seems to be clear, at least if you judge from what experts are stressing, that this may not be enough, that more may be needed, especially if NATO is going to play a more important role in trying to find a solution to the war in Ukraine, if NATO is going to continue to play a role when it comes to guaranteeing security of its members. So that is certainly one priority that will be very important when it comes to general defense and Ukraine. The other element is that the war in Ukraine obviously continues. It started in 2022 in February, and back then not many believed that 2.5 years later the war would still continue and that the world would be far away from finding a solution to what's happening in Ukraine. And NATO will certainly play a big, if also controversial, role in trying to bring that conflict to an end.
And how is NATO preparing for a possible Trump presidency in the US, especially since Donald Trump has been so critical of some members of the alliance?
Mark Rutte is actually described as Trump whisperer, in other words, as someone who has in the past been able to discuss with Donald Trump important discussions, important elements about the NATO alliance. So there is certainly hope that if Donald Trump becomes the next US president, that Mark Rutte will have, let's say, an open door to discussing with Trump, even in times where Trump might be very controversial about NATO alliance, where he might question the NATO alliance. But what Mark Rutte has also stressed, especially when he looks at some of his European colleagues, is that Europe has to be prepared to work with whoever comes into the White House, whether it is Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. What's also relevant in this particular case is how the US would move if NATO does become more or less important. There is an understanding here in Europe that irrespective of what happens in the United States, Europe has to step up when it comes to its own defense. So Mark Rutte's priority will not only be to try and discuss with the future US leader, whether it is Trump or Kamala Harris, but also at the same time to make sure that Europeans continue to step up when it comes to the defense expenditures.
OK, Thomas Sparrow there in Berlin.